Hello, and welcome to the Canadian Story, where we discuss what Canada is, what Canada could be, and what Canada should be. Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Canadian Story. We're joined again by my old boss and one of the key players in the Canadian conservative movement, Michael Binnion of the Modern Miracle Network, among many of the other things that he does. Michael, welcome back to the show.
Oh, happy to be here, David.
We're here to talk about probably the most important topic in Alberta right now, and I would argue the most important topic in Canada, though probably a lot of Canadians would disagree. What's going on in Alberta, and why does there appear to be a front-runner candidate in the UCP leadership race who's proposing a Sovereignty Act? More importantly, what do you think Alberta's path to a fair deal is, if there is a path? And what's your take on the leadership race? We have lots to talk about.
Yep, no, that's all. It's all interesting stuff, and lots of minds to step on in there.
yes, indeed. So, what do you think? What do you think's happening in Alberta? Are people waking up to what's your read on?
Yeah,
we've had Derek on. We've had Dennis Modry on.
So I would just on a big picture level, demographics, right? I think that we need to realize that there's been a lot of, over 20, 30 years, there's been a big influx of people into Alberta, drawn here by, drawn in here by opportunity, drawn to Alberta for, a lot of reasons, lower cost of living, lower taxes, but, more jobs, higher paying jobs. All of these things bring people here. But a lot of the people that are come from, somewhere else in the country. They bring a lot of their culture with them. I mean, that's all immigration has the benefit of, that people bring, new ideas and new cultures with them, and that always blends in. But we should realize that in that demographics, it's created a strong demographic that's in favor of, NDP type policies. And we should understand they joined a long tradition. We forget about this in Alberta a lot, but prairie socialism, or the CCF, it started in Saskatchewan and Alberta. And so this demographic means that Rachel Notley and the NDP have a strong natural constituency that I think a lot of us who grew up in Alberta with the Alberta advantage and I guess a little bit of Alberta exceptionalism, or the strong different entrepreneurial culture of Alberta. I mean, even prairie socialists are cash and carry people,
yes,
right?
Yes.
We even have a different kind of socialist, right? But I think those are maybe not quite as aware how strong this group of people are. And I'll just give you an example: people that came here to work in nursing or policing or firefighting or any of these public service jobs. None of them ever got immersed in the farming culture or the oil and gas culture. So they're not necessarily understanding, the Alberta advantage or the Alberta way of life the way I would, who grew up in it. And so I think that's one big picture thing that we should be aware is changing. And I think this ties into the whole leadership. There's this sort of idea that we conservatives just automatically win in Alberta because it's always been that way.
Yes.
But I think I don't think that's nearly as true as it used to be, and we should take note of that. We had a very left-wing mayor in Calgary, and we've got another one. We've had left-wing mayors in Edmonton. We had Rachel Notley for 4 years. I'm not sure that's the question you were asking. What's happening in Alberta?
No, it is. And I want to get into that because I think that is the key question, and actually the big reason why Take Back Alberta did what it did, because it looked like Jason Kenney was crashing in the polls. I don't want to talk about Jason Kenney too much here, but what I want to talk about is the parties were united because we saw that as the problem, right? We realized that the NDP were much stronger, and I would argue they're stronger now than they were in 2015. Would you agree with that?
I think they could be, for sure, and especially after people saw and you know, I mean, and I'm a big fan of Jason Kenney. I think he's a very talented guy. I think he's probably got a bit of a bum rap here relative to the situation he found himself in fighting COVID and so on and so forth. And I don't, and I, you know, and you know, the premier certainly knows I don't agree with a lot of the decisions he made, but that doesn't mean that I don't still have a lot of respect for him. But yeah, I think that, you know, the performance of a conservative government, you know, during this COVID crisis has probably done some help for the NDP.
And would you say that the party seems divided to you, or would you say that that's more of just a media thing going on? What's your read on the state of the party? Like, is the party back to Wild Rose PC? Is there a new division? What's your read on like the state of the union? I mean, you study this stuff all the time.
So yeah, so I would put it in the context of what I've always said was unique about Alberta and why Conservatives always won, is because we were one of the very few places that had an urban-rural coalition. And why was that? Because the main economic driver of Calgary, which by the way is half as true as it was 30 years ago, but it's still probably the top driver of economic activity, is oil and gas in Calgary. And where do we do our work? We do our work on farms. So if you work in oil and gas, you'd better get along with farmers. And then farmers, by the same token, hey, I want to get those jobs. I want to have that activity. I want to have those rentals. I better get along with those people from Calgary. And there's always been a little bit of a tension there. And it's interesting to go out and talk to farmers. And I'm saying, yeah, you got to watch those guys from the city, you know, but they're okay if you watch them, you know, if you just, as long as you watch them, they're okay, you know, But there was this strong economic incentive to keep this urban-rural coalition together. But we should be clear that it is, you know, urban people and rural people you see across the country. That there's a divide. You see it in the United States too. You're seeing it in Europe right now. So then getting back to my initial comment, look at the immigration, the net migration into Calgary. Well, these people are not coming into oil and gas. They don't spend time with farmers. They're not understanding why we should care about what rural people care about. So I would say that urban-rural coalition is shakier than it was 20, 30 years ago for the same demographic reasons I started with. But we should also understand, you know, that strong conservative vote that you could rely on decade after decade. You know, it's changing, and it's based on a successful rural-urban coalition.
It's a really good take on it, because I think a lot of pundits would say, "Oh, it's just it's a Wild Rose PC, more, you know, or the convoy versus the establishment." But I really agree with you. The divide between the rural and urban just seems to be getting worse and worse in this country, and it's caused the Conservative Party of Canada a lot of grief that you've worked a lot on. Do you want to mention that, what you've seen just on the federal level as well as the Alberta level on the divide?
Yeah, well, if you want, you know, people with conservative principles and ideals, which of course, you know, I just think make common sense. But let's be clear, people who have liberal views, they've got some points. You know, every now and then they got a point, right?
Right.
So you know, we should be respectful of people with different views. Is what I'm trying to say there in a sort of lighthearted way. To win federally, we need to pull in suburban votes, people who have many of the same issues of rural people. Like, I have to make a living, I have to pay a mortgage, I have to run my, you know, maybe I'm running a business, or maybe, you know, but I'm dealing with the practicalities of day-to-day life, and I just want a government that either gets out of my way or helps me. And I don't want to. So I think that's who we have to pull in. And I think these people in suburban places in the big cities, you know, have, at least in the last 10 years, have moved away, or I guess since 2015 they moved away. But I think at the end of the day, those people who have those practical day-to-day concerns about living their lives are very persuadable to do whatever is going to make their life better, and they just have to decide. We have to, you know, people have to present present an option that says, hey, we're here with these principles and it's going to make your life better. And by the way, we're not going to take away your health care, and we're not going to take away your social programs, and we're not going to take away, and we're not going to take away your hard fought for women's rights. I mean, these are things that I think that the Liberals have done a very good job of saying, oh, well, those are scary people. They're going to steal your rights away from you. But I think that's ridiculous, but I know that they've been successfully at labeling us that way.
Absolutely. So you've done a lot of campaigning. You've done a lot of public research. I've helped you do some of that. You've seen a lot of things. What do you think the state of Canadian democracy is right now?
Well, I think one thing we should realize that these things all come in waves, and that at any point in time in society, it's hard to not always have somebody who's left out, right? And so I just want to go back and sort of, in terms of political history, political sociology, I really believe in this right, left, like each generation reacts to the generation before. And so you tend to have these waves that come every 50 years or every 2 generations. And I think we're in one right now, but I'll just tell you what I mean. So in the 1910s, so we'll go 1910s, 1960s, 2010s, 50, 2 generations, in gaps. So in the 1910s, what was the big concern? It was workers' rights.
Right.
And what's disconcerting is that, of course, socialists co-opted a genuine issue, which was that workers were not being treated very well. There was a big societal change where rural people had moved to urban cities and had improved their lives, but then business owners were taking advantage of a lack of good employment law and so on and so forth to keep these people down, right? And I don't think there's anybody that looks at the history today that doesn't realize, hey, you know what, that wasn't right. Right?
Yeah,
that was not right.
Yeah.
Sending children into coal mines, that wasn't right. Sending workers into unsafe conditions, that wasn't right. I think there was a mistake at the time that the establishment class basically told the workers to get back in their place. And at the end of the day, there was a revolution, literally revolutions in many countries. And socialists managed to co-opt that movement to tell them that the solution to their problem was socialism. That killed even more people. So there's an example of what I mean. So here, fast forward 1960s, what's the big issue? It's equal rights. Well, who today doesn't think that, Black people sitting in the back of the bus didn't make sense? Who today doesn't believe that First Nations shouldn't have the vote, which they didn't get in Canada until 1960? Like, who doesn't believe that was a real issue, right? But once again, there was a certain, group of elitist people in certain places that said, no, women stay in your place, race, different minorities stay in your place. And so, of course, there was a what they called in Quebec the Quiet Revolution was, I think a social revolution, we called it. It wasn't so quiet, and it often became violent. But again, socialists co-opted it, right, to say, hey, we can help you get your equal rights. Okay, so what do I think now to your question? What's happening today? Well, we've got this issue about global environment, population growing, people not really understanding how can I put 2 cases of water bottles into the landfill every day when everybody else is doing the same thing? How can we all drive an SUV? It's going to be 10 billion people. All those people in China want to drive one too. How is this all? There's a lot of banks. How is this all going to work? And the other thing is, at the same time, we reacted to the 1960s with the Reagan Thatcherism of global free trade. So we got 2 sort of big things at play: the global environment, which people have a lot of angst about, and the idea that we should have open global trade. The problem with that, of course, is we focus on consumerism, right? Consumption and growth. What that meant is we made people here compete with foreign labor. There's a whole class left behind, right? So I think what we've got in society right now is we've got another class war. And we're going to, and you'll say, oh, it's all caused by the internet. Well, trust me, the social revolution in the 1960s, there was a lot of polarization. There was no internet. And the 1910s, there was a lot of violence. There was a revolution in France in the 1700s. There was no internet. Like, polarization happens because of classes not feeling they're being treated fairly, and ultimately will, if their issues aren't taken into account, they will in some form or another rebel. So that's what I think is happening right now. Polarized society. We have we've let our own working class be left behind for too long, and they are unhappy. And then we've got sort of some global elites who are very happy. They want to keep buying their cheap TVs from China. They want to keep buying their cheap T-shirts. And they want to tell all these working people, get back in your place. Ironically, it's the opposite people telling them to get back in their place. It's not the capitalists anymore, right? It's the urban elites. But get back in your place, and if you don't like it, well, then get an education and become a global elite yourself. So I think that's not going to last. Eventually, that somebody has to win on that. And the other thing is, eventually, we have to have a solution for people on the angst on the environment. And I think there's going to be polarization until somebody wins this class war.
What does victory in the class war look like?
Well, I tell you, I mean, there's the difference between an elite and an elitist. It's pretty hard for me not to say. I mean, I grew up in a very poor neighborhood, and so I always wonder how did I become privileged, because it wasn't always so easy for me growing up. But nonetheless, I managed to get an education. We had a great system in Canada that made getting university educations relatively cheap and easy with loans and so on and so forth. So I guess I certainly become somebody who would be a 1%er, and in that sense an elite. But I'm far from an elitist. I mean, I come from blue collar roots and homesteading great grandparents, and I have a lot of time for rural people, farmers, small business people, working blue collar people. And so I'm on their side. Like, we have to take better care of our workers. And if that means we have to pay a little more for a T-shirt, then we should pay more for a T-shirt. That's my view, right?
Oh, I agree 100%. Yeah, 100%.
Yes, there has to be a limit to this, of course. We can't go back to what we had in, the result that came out of the 60s, where unionized workers were holding us all to ransom and producing crappy cars, right? Like, we can't have that either. So there has to be a balance sought, but definitely I'm on the side of that we need to treat our own people better. Stephen Harper does such a good job of this in his book, talking about the somewheres and anywheres, that there's this battle between somewheres and anywheres, and that we should move to this idea of reform conservatism. I'm not sure he uses that term, but it's what he means. And it basically says we should focus on production and jobs, not consumption and growth, right? And this, of course, is what the Asians have done.
Yes, yes.
And this is why they don't have unrestricted free trade, right? We have some provinces in Canada that don't have unrestricted free trade, like Quebec, who's been blocking pipelines, blocking LNG plants, and expropriating companies like mine.
Yes. Yes.
Right. So I think we need to understand this idea of the Reagan Thatcherism idea of that free trade always makes things better is not true, because it might always make things cheaper. But if it leaves your own people behind, the somewheres versus anywheres, then it's creating a social class problem.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more, because we've seen this. And it's become that Trumpian populism that we saw in America, I think, was the people that were left behind. And then Trump came along and said, hey, you've been left behind, and that's not right. And that's why he did so well, I think.
Yeah, now, and also for him to recognize how many people that is in our society. Like we're not taught. I think some of these people in downtown Toronto think, oh yeah, well, there's maybe 20 people out in Alberta that got left behind. No, it's like half of our society.
Yes. So on that note, I think that's a really good segue into Alberta, right? Alberta doesn't just feel left behind by globalism. We feel rejected by our own nation, and we can't even produce our own resources anymore and get them to market without Ottawa interfering. You've started an organization called the Modern Miracle Network. We talked about that in the first episode. I just want to talk about what you are seeing the future of Alberta's oil and gas industry as, and what role that plays in the politics that are kind of boiling under the surface of Alberta.
Yeah. Well, I mean, to me, this more and more. I mean, I came out of a finance training, accounting training, business training. So, I was always in that world of, like where conservatives love to live and the rational. That's all be real world. This is the way it is. Let's, stop being a bunch of bleeding hearts. Like, the world's a tough place. And this is, of course, why a lot of liberals don't like us, because they don't, you guys all sound so mean, But I've now realized that it turns out the soft sciences are the most important sciences. And I'll just put this into a context, right? What's the most important thing to anybody? Right? It's I want to be happy. It's who do I love? Who do I trust? Who trusts me? Who loves me? Well, there's not a single economics or math textbooks that can answer these kinds of questions. These are the most important questions. I mean, that's always why they said, look, religion may not have answers to the big problems, but at least they're working on the big problems. Right.
Right. Yep.
The hard sciences are all working on the small problems and doing very well at it. So I guess I'll come back to, your question in Alberta. To me, it comes back to the culture again. And within Canada, I've spent a lot of time in Quebec, and I learned a lot about the way people think there, and in other countries. And the way people think in Quebec is actually closer to the way most people in the world think. While we might be the majority in Canada, we're probably a minority in the world. Same thing with First Nations, by the way. First Nations have a cultural thinking that's more like most societies in the world, as opposed to ours, where we're kind of in this very successful but minority, right? So what I look at, say, Alberta in particular, we have what I call like a mercantile culture. So this is what Napoleon referred to the British as being a nation of shopkeepers.
Yep.
Alberta's, we're kind of like a province of shopkeepers. Like, all we really want to do is get back to running our shop, whether it's our farm, whether it's our business, whether it's our job, whether it's our, our life trying to raise our kids. We just want to get back to our business, and we want the government to leave us alone. And we want relatively open markets to just get back to running our shops. Ontario is more political, but for sure Quebec and the Maritime provinces, these are very political cultures. So what we need to understand: if you're a political culture, you don't mind losing a little GDP for political power. You know what I mean? Like, and for an Alberta, say, what do you mean? Like, we would lose a little GDP? What for? Like, what is political power, and what would we do with it anyways? We just want to get back to running our shops. So you have this you see people from Alberta all the time. I talk to them all the time. They're all around me here. I'm in Lake Country now, but in my home in Calgary, who are all saying, well, we just need to go explain to the people in Ottawa and Toronto and Montreal about how this is good for the economy. But they're not nations of shopkeepers.
Right.
Right. So why would they? They're not just trying to get back to their shops. They're trying to maintain political power. And of course, what's the big source of power? It's like, it's guns, armies, whatever. It's votes. It's the mob. It's the population. It's elections, or it's money. And we saw before the Dutch invented capitalism with the invention of the company, right? In 1600-ish. That before that, it was the people with the guns, like the nobles, the kings, the princes that all had armies. They were the rich people because they had the most power. They had the guns. Well, post-capitalism, it's not the people with the guns. It's not the people with the votes. It's the people with the money. People in Ontario and Quebec understand, well, Alberta gets too much money. They're getting too much power. And then we go to them and say, so if you can imagine this sort of funny conversation that happens, people from Alberta go, we just need to go explain to them how us making more money means they get to make more money. And all that person down in Ottawa hears is, oh my gosh, they've got so much power because they've got so much money. And they come down here explaining how they're going to get even more. Well, how is that? How is that not even a worse thing? So there's a cultural problem between Alberta and the rest of the country. And people always want to divide it down to money. It's because they take our money. I actually would be more than happy to send 10, 20 billion a year to the rest of the country. Just leave us alone and let us get back to our shops. The problem for me has been, we do send 20 billion a year. For decades, it bought political peace. It kept them out of our politics. And now they're taking the money and interfering in our politics and making it that we can't run our shops. So to me, it's not the 20 billion. We talk about that, but it's actually the fact You're coming in and making it that we can't run our shops anymore. You won't let us transport our products anymore. You're putting taxes on us to make our businesses unviable. Like you're getting in the way of us running our shops. So I think that's the political move they're making, which is all around keeping us from gaining political power, which we don't even really want. We just want if we had the political power, we'd use it to not interfere, right?
Yes.
But they don't get that about us. If you're from there, if you come out of a political centered culture, you can't understand somebody saying, well, if I had political power, I wouldn't use it. They're going, well, what kind of person would do that? Nobody, right? So they don't believe us. So that there's that. Anyways, you know what I mean? We're all speaking English, but we're talking different languages problem.
Yeah.
But anyways, I would say that fundamentally the demographics of Alberta being very young, being very mercantile and economically focused, has now reached a bit of a crisis level, in particular with this ideological, power-oriented government, that it's a culture problem for us in Canada right now. And that we talk about it in the terms of the money, but it's actually a culture problem. Just like Quebec was looking to separate based on culture, I think Alberta separation is growing because of this cultural issue. Very related to money, but it's not about the money.
I don't know what you think, Zach, but a lot of people have come on to talk about this. Nobody said that, and I love it. That is
We've talked lots about the flow of money, but nothing about why on a communication level things are breaking down between Ottawa and Alberta, and that's incredibly fascinating to think about. Just the two different ways of approaching the problem and why communication isn't happening, because it's two different ways of looking at the situation. That's a new piece that we haven't had yet before. Absolutely.
Yeah, trust me, it's not about the 20 billion. We can afford it. You might not like it, you know what, but I don't like that. You know, I don't like a lot of things in my life that are too expensive. But that's not underneath this is this whole, we just want to live our lives and get back to running our shops. And by running our shops just might be, I just want to get back to work, make some money, take my kids to hockey. I just want to run my life and I want to be left alone. And by the way, I think this is true. Like there are people like this everywhere in the country. I mean, you see, there's like people in the suburbs of Toronto where it's just like, let me get back to running my life too. But I would just say from a dominant culture point of view, and that's single out Quebec because it's so much more obvious there, is that, you know, it's all about the politics and less about like, do we think Quebec doesn't have amazing resources? Mining, forestry, hydro. I mean, they've got amazing. And look at the size of the province. I mean, it's got so much. We've got so much resources there. And now, of course, we discovered major gas there. Like, do we not think that Quebecers could be rich if they would just go and run their shops?
Run your shop. Run your own shop. That's the title of this episode right there. Run your own shop. Okay.
But of course, just to finish that, if you're a Quebecer feeling like you're a persecuted minority in this sea of English, political power turns out to be more important to protect yourself than making that extra bit of GDP.
Right. Yes. Okay. So we've set the table here in an amazing way, and I'm very appreciative of that. I think you've done an incredible job of explaining the problem. How does Alberta get out of this mess where we suddenly have a bunch of political power hungry people making it so we can't run our shops?
Well, here's what I say, and this is a bit of a paradox. Like, if the strength of Alberta is that, like, and here's what I think the two strengths, like I would say Alberta is a state of mind. I mean, you can be here for 6 generations like my family, and some of my family still doesn't get it, or you can be here for 6 months and completely get it. Like, and the reason for that is that, and I don't want to, I mean, I have a reason to single out Quebec. They're screwing me over in my business deal right now, but I'll use them as because they're a good example of to illustrate the difference on that. So if you're in Quebec, you've got a shared culture based on a shared history of 400 years and a shared language and so on and so forth. And so it's all around, we have a shared identity based on this shared history. Well, in Alberta, like, I literally heard the history of Alberta from my great grandmother's lips to my ears. We have so little history. I could hear it in person. You can't do that in Quebec, obviously. It's 400 years ago. So we have a shared identity in Alberta based on a shared future. That's why you can come here, only be here for 6 months, and be every much as part of Alberta's future as somebody who's been here for 6 generations. That's a real amazing strength of our culture. The other thing that is I think that mercantile, just that you can be free to run your shop, and as long as you're sharing our future, you can be part of our province. So that's why I say it's a state of mind, right? And I think where we're at in Alberta is it's this apolitical nature that creates, with no history, in a shared future, means that we just can't understand the politics of the country. And we want to keep going to explain to them why you should let us make more money and have more power. And so here's the paradox. Our very strength of being apolitical, we need to learn to be good at being political. We're not going to win this political battle in Canada by getting better at running our shops. Right?
Yes. You're on fire today. This is great. Yeah. Okay. So how do we get to be political?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think we have to start having a whole bunch of conversations with Albertans for them to understand that while getting political is going to be sort of a step backwards for us, it's the only way to move forward in the country. And the other thing is, you will never gain autonomy without a political battle. Right? It's like the idea of taking power into our own hands, or having more autonomy for Alberta. This is inherently a political act, which means you have to do something political, right? This I think it's going to be. I think the whole idea of Alberta autonomy is a whole bunch of explaining to Albertans our culture really is different. They're not the same as us, because they think first in terms of political issues. We think first in terms of mercantile issues. Therefore, paradoxically, we have to get good at what they're good at so that we can keep their politics out of our politics.
Well, yeah, it's like two different card games. It's like if, I'm playing euchre and I'm euchre is politics, and you're playing Uno and you're really good at Uno, you're still not going to win at euchre, right?
And then that's it. And that's the problem, is we have to get good at their game to keep them out of our game.
Yeah.
I love what you said. I want to go back a little bit, but I love what you said about saying it's going backwards for us, because everybody in Alberta is like, I don't want to care about politics.
That's it.
And actually, I think that's the problem in Alberta. Right? I think the reason the Conservative Party has been in such disarray, whether it's the PC Party, the Wild Rose Party, the UCP, or even the Wild Rose Independence Party, look at how much disarray they have, is that Albertans don't want to get good at politics. They hate it.
Yep, that's right. So there's the paradox for us, right? As a province, and by the way, you could, it maybe would be palatable to the average Albertan, which is just saying, listen, I don't want to have to think a lot about politics. I just want to run my farm. I just want to run my life, right? Then maybe what we need to do is to find a government of people who can be good at it for us, and then support them, right? If we could, but at a very minimum, we need to realize that we have to elect some people in Alberta that are going to be able to go head to head with relatively Machiavellian, ruthless political actors in Ottawa who all talk nicely. I mean, the art of seduction and charming is always at the forefront when you're in Quebec. I mean, nobody wants to, everybody's charming there, right? But they're always thinking about politics.
Okay, so now that we've set the stage here, we have a big political question coming up, right, in Alberta, which is, I think, are we going to go down the path of socialism, or are we going to go down the path of free enterprise, right? And Alberta consistently for the last 5 decades, let's say, besides the blip in 2015, has chosen the path of free enterprise. We're at a crossroads. And one of the most important questions on that crossroad is actually also independence. What does independence look like for Alberta? And there's a lot of arguments going on, right? We have Travis Tate's team saying, yes, we need more autonomy, but we need to be strategic. We have Brian Jean's team saying we need to reopen the negotiation of the Constitution, right? We have Danielle Smith's team saying we need basically a sovereignty act, but a kind of declaration of independence that Alberta is going to chart its own course forward. You have spent more time thinking about this than almost anyone. I would say you're probably the foremost expert on it. And I don't think a lot of people realize that, but since you're the foremost expert on it, you care the most about this of anyone I know in terms of getting into the details.
Yeah.
What are the details of what is going on with the sovereignty movement, and how is it shaping itself around those three candidates' different perspectives, let's call it?
Yeah. Yeah, and you didn't mention Schultz. Schultz has, I think, a really
yes.
She has a great, I think she's put out a really great 100-day action plan on autonomy too. Okay, a couple things. So first of all, isn't it great that four leading candidates, and I don't mean to be disparaging of Lowen or Swanee, because I think they all in certain ways have talked about that autonomy is important to lesser or greater degrees. But for sure, the top candidates on this issue, there's not a single one of them that doesn't understand that standing up for Alberta is not a top issue. And so isn't it great there's agreement on that? And so we're now into the situation, well, who am I going to pick, especially if I don't want to personally have to care much about politics? Who do I pick to be a leader who will care for me? We've got some choices, and there's not one of them who's saying, oh, don't be silly. Like, they all get it. You're right. This is an important issue. So I think that Alberta voters need to look at those options and plans. I think they have to look and say, who do they think is the person who has the fortitude? Who's that person that can go into a room with Gerald Butts, right? Who's that person that can go into a room with Legault, right? And not walk out all charmed and bamboozled, right? That is smart and tough and can go toe to toe with those people, and also has a plan, right? So I think there's both a character issue and a plan issue here. And I think Albertans need to look at that. I also think it's really important for us to understand that there are no simple solutions to complex problems.
Yes. So
let's not say, oh, we'll just have a referendum and it'll fix everything. That, like, this kind of thinking is seductive. Oh, we'll just have a referendum. That'll be the end of this problem, and I can go back to running my shop. Like, that's not going to happen either. So let's stop looking at simple solutions to complex problems. And then I think the final one is understand what we're talking about are inherently political acts that then need to be put into the context of the law. Why? Because no political act is going to be accepted by the population as a whole or by the international community unless it's within the context of law, right? And law can change, law can be pushed. It doesn't have to actually be like this. I'm not saying laws can't be changed and things can't be in the context of the law, but we need to realize there will be no acceptance from international trading partners of an inherently illegal act. There won't be general acceptance within the Alberta population of an inherently illegal act. So I think we have to then say, let's do something lawfully. I think all four candidates or all seven candidates. I mean, I think every one of them is at least on the right point to a greater or lesser extent. But I do think it's an important choice. I guess get back to who's got the character, who's got the plan. I'm personally, if I just go into what I personally think.
Absolutely.
What I think is that we should be following something what I call responsible government. This is a this is a defined term, big R, big G. So, we all get taught in grade 10 social studies that Canada, became independent in 1867. Well, that's just simply not true, right? We didn't get the Constitution back from London until 1982. Like, so the Canadian Constitution, unlike America, There was no Big Bang. It was an evolution that happened from literally 1763. The Treaty of Paris became, the Quebec Act. I don't think I have the name of that exactly right, but it was 1763. It was already amended in 1774. Right. And then, I mean, there was major amendments made after the rebellions in 1838. And of course, 1867 was important, but it was really 1867 was mostly just a merger of 4 colonies. There was no major constitutional change, but other than that merger. I think it's 1931 was when London finally said that colonial law supersedes English law. Conrad Black says Canada didn't truly become independent until that act, because until then British law was over top of our law. 82 is obviously important. It brought the Constitution. But the Quebec Succession Act, which led to the Clarity Act, that's another major change to our Constitution. It says there is a path to secede from Canada, which there isn't in the United States, by the way, right? They'll have a war if you try.
Except for Texas, I suppose.
But in Canada, we don't have that. And I think it's because we have, by the way, that entire process leading up to 1867 was the colonials saying we need to demonstrate responsible government so that London will allow us to have more local autonomy. So my view is that we should just continue 250 years of tradition, and that Alberta should demonstrate responsible government, big R, big G. If we just demonstrate responsible government and then learn to exercise political power, which I believe Alberta has a lot of, because we generate a lot of wealth, which does give you political power if you choose to use it. The combination of responsible government and political using the power we have can lead to much more autonomy. And if necessary, and I always say like autonomy if necessary, but not necessarily autonomy, is that, if necessary, leads to full autonomy. But that'll all depend on what the rest of the country does when they start to see us, A, showing responsible government, and B, so something that they can respect, right? Look at those people. They're managing their own pension money like Quebec does. They're able to police themselves. They're able to collect revenues and administer taxes themselves. Those people are grown up. They're like Ontario and Quebec. They can manage themselves now. So there's the responsible government element. And then the next part is to say, oh, and look at them. They're also exercising political power.
Right.
They're grown-ups. And so I guess we better get some respect for those people. And if they don't show some respect for us after we give reason to be respected, then I think it could lead to potential full autonomy, right? So for my view is that we stay within our parliamentary democracy tradition that was successful in making Ottawa independent of London over a period of time. We follow the same path under the same common law, under the same constitutional traditions, and we become autonomous by taking political acts, all the while showing responsible government.
I love that. Okay, so we're nearing the end here. APP, they're having big events. We had Dr. Modry on here. He talked about APP's vision. I know that you appreciate that people are going out and educating on what Alberta's place is in Confederation, but how could that mission, like, why is that mission unlikely to succeed? I'll explain why I'm not a member of APP right now, and that's because I don't think Albertans want to leave Canada.
Right.
And I think if we have a referendum, we'll lose. Right now.
Well, I think we also have to understand. I mean, I loved Dennis Modry. He's got such passion, and he's like all those leadership choices. Their sentiment is in the right place. Which of them has the best? Some of them have better plans than others on how to exercise this power, right? And so I think voters have to look at it and say, who do I think has the right plan, the responsible plan that fits into responsible government and that can help us do this? But they're all in the right place. I mean, to me, you can't hate any of them. And I say the same about Dennis Modry. super passionate. He's educated himself well on some of the inherent injustices that are happening for Alberta. By the way, I mean, I talk about hearing Alberta's history from my great grandmother. I mean, the Crows rate was the injustices to Alberta started at the beginning. They wouldn't give us our resources in 1905. I mean, my grandfather was in the military police and in the Air Force, and there was a lot of inherent unfairness in the way the draft was done in World War II. I mean, there's to Alberta, right? There's all kinds of these injustices over many years. It's not just recently. But Dennis is well educated himself. Here's what I would say that the one thing wrong there is autonomy is a political act, where a referendum gives it a referendum will give that act make it lawful, but the referendum is not the act, right? The act is taking power. The referendum is what gives it the legitimacy of law, which is not just international law. Self-determination. We now have Canadian law after the Quebec succession reference. We now have Canadian law that will give legitimacy through a referendum. But I think the problem I find with a lot of people like Dennis Modory's group is that they think the referendum is the act. The act is taking power. The referendum is what gives it legitimacy, and that's what they're missing. So we need to get ourselves ready to take the political act, and we don't have to, as you said, we don't have to go all there in one way, in one step. We can take power and show responsible government step by step. And then if the rest of the country recognizes that, hey, they're acting responsibly and they're exercising their power well, then we'll end up with a negotiated settlement, just like Canada had with London, right? There was no war to get Ottawa to separate from London. There doesn't necessarily need to be a war to get Edmonton separate from Ottawa. We can follow that process. Anyway, so there's my fundamental thing, is that they're just not understanding that. Again, they're looking for a simple solution to a complex problem. The referendum is nothing more than a symbol of legitimacy to the act you're trying to take.
That's a great summary. 5 more minutes. Give us your thoughts on what an independent Alberta could look like, because you and I have talked on the phone about this. I think too often we talk about the act of separating and not enough the act of building something new.
Right. Okay. So, I mean, what I think has just been so crazy, and it just shows the mentality of Albertans, who I think, as many people have shown, we've been very loyal Canadians, including putting up with some of the things that happened in World War II in the draft. We could be the richest country overnight, the richest nation. And I just look at the Norway example, right? Like Norway, we have more oil and gas than Norway, and we have fewer people. Like literally overnight, if we took the political, I don't think we're in a position. I don't think we are in a position to govern ourselves yet. But let's say we were, and let's say we did, we would be the richest nation overnight. And the other thing, so I look and say, well, why are we spending so much time trying to convince the rest of Canada to not be the richest place? Like, why aren't they coming to us and saying, please don't leave, because this is upside down somehow, right? But I think it's because, people feel loyal towards being Canadians. And if the rest of Canada would treat us well, I think we would go on continuing to contribute to the rest of Canada, right? So there's one point. We could be the richest, nation overnight. The other thing that I think is really important for us to understand is the biggest mistake people make in a lot of negotiations is worrying about their own weaknesses. So we couldn't do that. Somehow we wouldn't know how to manage our pension. We'd lose all that $400 billion that Ottawa manages for us. We would be landlocked. It would be even worse to get our oil out. I'm going, no. You're not thinking about this right. You need to think about the weaknesses of the other person. Don't think about your own. Think about theirs, right? In a sovereign or more autonomous Alberta, but like autonomous more in the way Switzerland or Norway are, very much integrated with the European Union, like not fully independent really, but an integrated, like a nation within a nation type idea, right? The rest of Canada, like, how do they run their economy without our oil and gas? Like, how do they run our economy if people don't, Alberta runs massive trade deficits with Ontario and Quebec and the rest of the country, right? And we generate most of the foreign exchange. Like, so I mean, by the way, how do you get a Toyota from Vancouver to Toronto if you don't go through Alberta? Like this is, and by the way, suddenly Alberta would have rights to retaliate. We could put tariffs on goods. We could block things traveling through the province. We could block planes from flying over top of us. This is why countries like Austria and Switzerland, who are landlocked countries, do just fine, right? Because it turns out the European Union wants them to be integrated, right?
Yeah.
So and given Alberta's position as a petro power, right? Like Norway or other, Saudi Arabia even, we would have a lot of power, right? We'd have a lot of power, right? So I mean, I'm not saying that we wouldn't have some weaknesses, but let's not go into this on the basis that we have weaknesses and they don't. They got more weaknesses than we do, and there's every reason that we would expect, just like we've seen in Europe, that people would make agreements. Like Britain is still trading with Britain left the EU. Is the EU not still trading with Britain?
Yeah.
And of course, Britain is not, it's not independent in energy anymore. You're seeing that they've got major problems there right now with the shortage of gas. And so I think I guess that's, the two things I would say is, one is to understand it's a political act where the law gives you legitimacy in the international community. And then second of all, to understand we have a lot of power. We just have to learn to use it. And the rest of Canada will have weaknesses too, not just us.
Incredible conversation. Zach, do you have any last questions before we go?
Yeah, I have two, and I'm going to ask them separately because they're kind of unrelated. You spoke about how Alberta needs someone, one, with a plan, and two, with enough fortitude to stand up to the Machiavellian tongue in Ottawa. Is there an individual or a couple individuals that you would get behind in this leadership race in Alberta right now to do the job?
Yeah, well, there's one of the minds that I alluded to at the beginning of this conversation.
And if you don't feel comfortable answering the question, that's fine. But I'm curious to know your take.
Yeah, So I think there's different. Here's what I would say: every one of those four leading candidates, and I'd like to put Rebecca Schultz among them, even though I know she's a bit further behind, just because I think she's running a really great campaign. I think they all. I think. They're all people that I know. I think they're all people with, pluses and minuses. Like if you ask my wife, she'll even say that I have some minuses, which is, I'm sure. But yeah, so I at the end of the day, I think far more important, what I decided in the end, far more important is to help work with whoever wins to make sure that we do have, that person, whoever it is, whether that they do as well as they possibly can in that position, and that we continue to pick free enterprise over socialism. So I guess that's where I've decided to sit down. And also, Modern Miracle is a group. I'm also chairman of the Canada Strong and Free, and so both of those groups have internal policies. It doesn't stop me from personally taking a position, but as an organization, we don't. So that's a long way of saying I'm not answering.
Congratulations congratulations on successfully stepping over the mind. Okay, so one other question, and I think I meant to ask you this last time you were on the show, and I just didn't get to it. As someone, this is something as a Canadian I've wondered for years now. As someone who has a background and really has dedicated a lot of his life to oil and gas, Why is it that we as a country do not have a pipeline from the west to the east that does not cross an international border? I just can't fathom why we wouldn't have that.
So the important history to understand there is the international demand and supply up and until the shale gas revolution. So up and until then, the heartland of the United States used way more oil than it produced. And so the entire North American pipeline network was developed to take internal oil sort of inside Canada to, and like it's inside North America to inside North America. So the cheapest and most direct and most efficient thing to do all the way up and until 2000 was for Alberta oil to be shipped to United States where they were short oil. So my whole career, West Texas traded at a discount to Brent because, or at a premium to Brent. I mean, West Texas was always a premium to Brent because the international oil had to go to a ship to a port and then get to a port inside the continent. Then after the shale gas revolution happened, so at that point in time, people in Quebec were going, why would we buy your expensive oil in Alberta that people in Illinois are willing to pay a high price for because they have to ship it from somewhere? We want the cheap oil from Saudi Arabia or whatever. Like Quebec doesn't import from Saudi Arabia now, but they did then. And we want that cheap oil from there. We don't want your expensive oil in Alberta. So the pipeline network was all from where was the highest paying market for Canadian oil. Then shale gas happened, and all of a sudden the Bakken exploded, and now the interior of the United States is producing more oil than it uses, and now West Texas starts trading at a discount. And now all of a sudden Alberta's going, hey, just a second, we're selling into this discount market. It used to be a premium market, now it's a discount market. How do we get our oil to the premium market, which suddenly became the international market? And that's when we went to say, well, we need to build pipelines. And we're shocked to find that the rest of the country wouldn't let us, right? But the international market need for those pipelines didn't happen until 2000, or 2005, and then what we found, of course, was no, we won't let you build. We won't let you expand TMX. We won't let you build the Gateway. We won't let you build Energy East. We won't let you. I mean, even in the United States, it's the same thing, right? Like, all of our oil goes easily to Chicago. It's harder to get it all the way to the Gulf refineries. So you got a Democratic state and a Republican state. Well, big surprise that when there's a Democrat president, they're blocking pipelines that would let you get oil to a Republican state. And when there's a Republican government, they're saying, oh, no, we do need the pipeline to get the oil to the Republican state. Like even that's right. So of course, the Chicago refineries are happy to buy our oil cheap if they can, right? Anyway, but there's the answer. The pipeline network was set up logically when it was built, and then when the logic changed, the politics wouldn't let us change the pipeline system.
That's a great answer.
Why are the politics that way? Why is it that Ottawa can't look at the situation and go, wow, there's a lot of opportunity to make money here. Money is good for us. Let's do that.
I think when we had Stephen Harper as a prime minister, I think he tried really hard to talk about us as an energy superpower and why we need to build this infrastructure. And I have to tell you, if you as a Canadian are thinking strategically about our position in the world, then it's you wouldn't be thinking for a second that we need to build this infrastructure. You would only be thinking about how it can be done in the best possible way.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. It makes me feel like our country doesn't take itself seriously.
Well, I'll get back to, I think what you'll find is that there are people in power in Ottawa now who are very political in nature. They're willing to give up a bit of Canadian GDP to maintain their political power. That's their culture, right? That's a cultural thing. They're not maximizing Canada's position in the world. They're maximizing their region's position in Canada. And so what doesn't look logical to us as an Albertan, or maybe even to a Canadian, if you look at Canada as a whole, is logical to you if you're within your region trying to maintain power over another region.
Right. Okay. Well, good answer.
It's power, not money. That's the important.
That's what we have to understand. People who are in political cultures think of power first and money second. And normally when you have power, you can then get money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good answer.
Thank you. I know we've gone over our time, so thank you very much, Michael. Again, always great to have you, and I'm looking forward to the continued conversation.
Okay. Thanks for having me again. Anytime.
Thank you for listening to The Canadian Story. You can find us on Instagram and Twitter at TheCAD That's the CAD Story. If you enjoy this podcast, please share it with your friends and family. Let's work together to remind Canadians how great their country is.